Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Human Challenge, where we explore all of the human challenges in today's world, the challenges of being human, and how we can challenge ourselves to be more human for the greater good. I'm your host, Vanessa, and today we are joined by Dr. Paulette Steeves, Cree Métis author of the Indigenous Paleolithic of the Western Hemisphere, an Indigenous archaeologist focusing on the decolonization and decolonizing our minds. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I really like the work that you do, but I think obviously it's not just work for you, right? It's a part of you, it's a part of your life, it's a part of your story, a part of your journey. And so I hoped you could share a little bit of that with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a long journey, but back in 1988, I was just becoming a newly divorced single mom with 3 kids, and I went to visit with an elder who I'd known for decades in Lillooet, BC, where I grew up, Elder Leonard Sampson, and he told me he knew what I was going through at the time was very difficult, but he said the elders had talked about me and watched me grow up, and he said they felt that I had a really important job to do that would really help Indigenous people, and it would be a lot more difficult, a lot harder than what I was going through at the time. And he said he didn't know what it was, but he said he knew it would really help all Indian people, not just our community, but all people. And when I was graduating, and I left and traveled across Canada, and here I was. I moved to Ottawa with my children, and here I was, a single parent with 3 kids, a truck, 26 cents, and a great education. I'm like, what am I going to do? But then, was it 25 years later? There I was on stage getting my PhD with honors. And I'm like, this is what Elder Leonard Sampson meant. I just have to rewrite the history of the Americas. Okay, I got this. No worries. So it began there. And during my PhD fieldwork, I was very honored and lucky to get a funded position with the head archaeologist at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. He's one of the very few people in North America that was actually researching and excavating what we call Pleistocene Age sites, so archaeological sites older than 10,000 years. So for my PhD fieldwork for 2 years, I got to work on sites in Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, different areas, and excavate mammoths and camel bone that had been worked on by humans, and some areas stone tools, and to look for new sites with signs of human activity. The standard in American archaeology was that archaeologists claimed that the indigenous people of the Americas had only been here 11 or 12,000 years, and they were Asians from Asia. But for us as indigenous people, we've been here since time immemorial. We've been here much longer than 11 to 12,000 years. And by the way, there was no Asian culture and no country called Asia 10 or 12,000 years ago. So we're not Asians from Asia. We're early humans, and we may have relations in a country today called Asia, but stop calling us that, right? We're indigenous. So that was a way that archaeology erased indigenous people in the Americas by calling us Asians from Asia. Because there's a very, very long history in the Americas. Any archaeologist that published on a site older than 11 or 12,000 years, a site that pushed back on the truth of that archaeological story, was violently critiqued. Some of them were fired from their jobs. They were threatened. They were called crazies, lunatics, bad archaeologists. It was so bad that it was, and this is published, it was called an area of academic suicide. If you want to end your career, deny that archaeological story that people been here this short time and publish that there's older sites. In 2 weeks, I had a list of over 500 archaeological sites that predated the so-called Clovis time frame of 11 to 11,200 years. And I'm like, wow, there's this many. And then, so every time an archaeological project is done, if they're building a road or a bridge, or a building, and they find an archaeology site, they have to document it. And that documentation report has to go to a state archaeology office. Those are called gray papers, not necessarily published, but well documented, dated, well professionally done, and the record goes to the archaeological office. I found that in Arizona alone, there were 1,500 sites that predated 11 to 12,000 years before present. So, this strong argument and violent denial of people being here before so-called Clovis timeframes is unfounded. And my book strongly supports that. So my book took 13 years to write because the volume of research was intense. Every single site I talk about in my book, or I list, or I show on a map, I've read every paper you could find on that site. I've studied the dating, who did the dating, when was it done. And there are a few sites that need a little more work, but there are sites that date from, 11,200 to over 200,000 years, and a few now that date over 300,000 years. And you look at the history of early humans. And so this is an area where I also had to be very multidisciplinary. The history of the possibilities of migration. So we have early humans left Africa over 2 million years ago, and they walked 14,000 kilometers to Northern Asia. They were very, very intelligent, very capable, very adaptable to new environments. So if you have early humans have the ability to migrate from Africa to Northern Asia over 2 million years ago, why couldn't they go a little farther into the Americas? So, was that possible? So then I had to delve into the paleo mammal record. I had to go into paleontology, and it was really interesting, but this is what took 13 years, to look at the records of when different species migrated between the Western Hemisphere, what we now call the Americas, and the Eastern Hemisphere that we now call Asia, India, and Europe. And we find that there are a number of mammals that first arose in North America. The horse arose in North America. The saber-toothed cat arose in North America. The oldest species is known from Florida 5,000 years ago. Here's a really old one. Our oldest human ancestors, according to Nova Science, are paleoprimates. 65 million years ago. Over 47% of the fossils of paleoprimates are found in the Badlands of Montana and Saskatchewan. Our earliest human ancestors arose in the Americas. So when Indigenous people say we have been here forever, they're just agreeing with the hard science that Nova presents, right? It's scientifically based. There's a number of species that we know migrated to the Eastern Hemisphere. They had to use a land connection, and they had to use one that was viable. There had to be land, there had to be grazing, there had to be, fresh water, and dry land to walk on. So you know that there's a number of species from the Eastern Hemisphere that came into the Americas. Different mammoth, elk, rhinoceros, different species. And there's a number of species in the Americas that arose and went the other way. Okay, so over millions of years, there's been a land bridge, right? Sometimes it was covered in ice, sometimes it was underwater. Obviously, a lot of times it was wide open. If you have early humans in Northern Asia over 2 million years ago, and you have mammals coming and going between both hemispheres, it's not impossible that humans could have got here before 11 to 12,000 years. It's much more impossible that humans first arose when there was a glacier covering that landmass for thousands of miles that was a few hundred feet deep in places. There was no food, there was no fresh water, there was no clear path. So between 25,000 and 1,000 years ago, that would have been an impossible time to migrate across that landmass.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, it was very possible. So the more that I learned and the more that I uncovered about paleo environment, paleo species migrations, early humans, the more interesting it became. And it just was amazing to learn that this whole time, all of that data was there for archaeologists, and they denied it and ignored it. When it comes to the Americas, for anyone to think that we know everything there is to know and that's it, and there was this one simple story, that's just not scientifically based at all. So learning all of this, I had to ask why would they deny it? And I began to look at the history of anthropology in the Americas. And that was the only hard part of this research, because it was really violent. The earliest archaeologists said that Alex Herlishka, the Indians only been here 3,000 years. And that wasn't based on any scientific body of data, right? It was based on one site he looked at in Alaska, and it was wrong. And then in the 1920s, Jesse Figgins, interestingly from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, excavated a site near Clovis, New Mexico, and found what they call Clovis tools. It's a very beautiful, well-made tool. There's a big flute, we call it, a piece out of the middle of the tool, so very identifiable. But he found them with the bones of an ancient bison that they knew had been extinct over 10,000 years. And so he had to begin to argue with Alex Herliska at the Smithsonian and others. And eventually he got most of them. Herliska never accepted it, but to accept that people had been here for at least 10,000 years. And it was stuck there until my book came out. It was stuck for 100 years at being 10,000 years, though there was a group of dedicated archaeologists who wanted to tell the truth. So even though that they feared their careers would be ended and they'd be violently critiqued, they published the truth on sites they found that were older than those Clovis technologies, older than 11 to 12,000 years. And Dr. Holland is one of those people. He recently in 2017 published on a site in California, just north of San Diego, that has dated to 130,000 years. I pulled together all of those publications, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of publications on archaeological sites, because one site might have 12 or 15 papers, one might have 2 or 3, there might be critiques. I reviewed all of that, and I made a huge database and I mapped those sites. And what it showed is that it was always been very possible that people could have been here earlier than 11,000 years. There are sites in South America that date to over 50,000 years. There's sites in North America that date to over 50,000, 100,000 years. This should be further explored, not ignored and not denied. When you have that many sites, I think there's 360 something in my book, you can't ignore that.
Mhm.
Right. I'll be going in April to present my research at the Society for American Archaeology conference, along with some of those archaeologists that have published on those early sites and a linguist who has published that the languages here would have taken at least 35,000 years to develop. And I don't know if it's going to be fireworks, but it's going to be interesting. I think now there's a much greater acceptance. I know a number of faculty are now using my book as a textbook. I get invited to talk to classes and give lectures all the time. So, and I've heard from a lot of Indigenous people that it's made a big change. It's given them hope. My adult daughter went to a young women's gathering in British Columbia a number of years ago, and I had by then published a few papers. And at that gathering, all the young women sat in a big circle, and each one was to share one thing that would bring hope to their communities. And they would gather all those thoughts and take them back to their communities. And my daughter said there was a young lady, and she began to talk. And my daughter said her face just lit up and started glowing. And she said, "Oh my God, there's this archaeologist she says, we've been here over 50,000 years. That gives me hope that we'll get our history, our land, everything back." And then my daughter says, "Tee hee hee," I didn't tell her it was my mom. So that really that really fuel is good medicine for my heart to hear from Indigenous people. And I've gotten a lot of emails from Indigenous peoples, from entire classes of Indigenous students telling me how much they appreciate and how much hope it brings them, my book and my research.
I love this change that you've been able to prove, to show, to create. I think it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. I feel that now we're sort of at a time where I think we're a little bit more aware of things. I mean, I would definitely say just the Palestinian liberation, that's been, I think, a huge awakening for a lot of people. And so I think that we see work that you do and we start putting a lot of pieces together. We start saying there's a lot here that we actually don't know. And so I'm curious, you mentioned before this used to be like academic suicide, and now you're hearing these amazing comments and compliments of your work. How do people receive this? What's the reaction?
It depends on the people. I've been accused by a few people of being the second Vine Deloria Jr., and he was very vocal and very critical of American archaeology. And like I say, for Indigenous people and for a lot of settler people, they've thanked me for writing my book, for opening their minds, because we're not really taught to think critically. We're taught that whatever scientists produce and publish is absolutely correct and based on scientific knowledge. And my research shows that that's absolute BS. It is not. We need to really, really always think critically, like specific things. Like a lot of academics still publish papers calling Indigenous people of the Americas Asians from Asia. Well, it's pretty easy to show people that 12,000 years ago, even, that when archaeologists said the first people came here, Asia didn't exist and an Asian culture didn't exist. So what are they doing using those words? What they're doing is erasing Indigenous identity and links to their homelands. So just teaching people that it's really not difficult when you question science to show how inaccurate and incorrect it is. And other archaeologists that have published on sites that are older than, 12,000 years have stated the same thing. The whole Clovis first hypothesis of people migrating across an ice bridge 11,000 years ago is not based on science or facts. It's based on conjecture. What archaeologists wanted it to be, not what it was. So that's really important to know. There's been a long history throughout the world of colonization, and that includes knowledge. And so if we look at social networking theory, if I see somebody today who's publishing that we've only been here 12,000 years, I can go look at, well, who did they get their PhD with? And who did they? And who did they? And I can trace it back to one of the earliest and actually racist anthropologists that taught in the Americas. So those early anthropologists that taught we'd only been here 3,000 years, we were, uncivilized savages, they taught the next generation. They took that and taught the next generation. Things have changed, of course, in every field of academia across time. After the Second World War, and archaeologists realized that the Holocaust had in part been based on knowledge and discussions from American archaeologists who were openly promoting superiority of the white race. They had an office of eugenics and a lab for eugenics in New York State. So archaeologists and anthropologists began to change their direction after the season. Some great things came of that. Medical anthropology, a lot of great anthropologists like Dr. Paul Farmer, who worked with a lot of communities in Africa, and a lot of more focus recently on community-based research and Indigenous knowledge. What do Indigenous people mean when they say they have been here since time immemorial? What do their oral traditions tell us? Archaeologists and anthropologists are just starting to listen. And so I think it was a really good time frame for my book to come out, supporting a lot of change and helping people to decolonize their minds and realize that knowledge and what we had been taught in the past was based in a lot of colonial bias. And we need to always question that. But beyond questioning it, we need to do things like disprove that knowledge, publish on that, and help to educate people. Because when you push back on any area, you push back on bias, racism, and discrimination. You help people to become informed, to address that. You make the world a better place for all people.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I think those are very powerful words to close this episode. So thank you so much. Is your book available? Is it just a textbook or is it available to everybody?
It's available to everybody. There's hardcover, softcover, and an audio version. It's available anywhere you buy books online, from the University of Nebraska Press and from a lot of bookstores.
We'll make sure to share all the links in the description. Thank you so much, Dr. Steeves, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.